Welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you. Today, I have the opportunity to interview Eugene Matos. He has an incredible experience and so many different things that he's done throughout his career, all the way from diplomacy to the military. Thank you so much for taking the time to join the podcast today, Eugene. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I really do appreciate it. I think it's gonna be fun.
Amazing. And to start off, I'd love if you could introduce yourself to our listeners and share a little bit about your background as well.
I'm from Dominican Republic originally, and I studied law in a bunch of places. I studied law in Germany. I studied law in Quebec, civil law and common law, and fought as well. Went to the military. Was a diplomat for a while. Was even a high school teacher at one point. I will introduce myself as someone that's very curious, very, 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 very curious, and I'm happy to jump into things. I will say that I enjoy life a lot after having served in the military. Life is so short. You have to have fun. I'm a skydiver instructor. I'm a pilot. I like to do intense stuff. Keeps me away from the work and life interesting. We're only here for such a short period of time, and that's all I have to say.
Oh, that's amazing. That's awesome. I love that. And if I may ask, maybe jumping into a little bit of your study experience, and then we can talk a little bit about your work and all of that. But I know you hold both a civil law degree, then from Quebec, and then some German background as well, and also a common law degree. And I also come from the civil law system myself.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, that's right. I started my career in Brazil. That's where I'm from and where my first degree is from.
You're Brazilian?
Yep.
Yeah,
Portuguese speaker.
fala português?
Sim.
Muito bem.
But what I'm curious to know, we talk often about these differences and all of that and comparing the system.
Sure.
But I'm wondering if for you it was a huge difference in the sense of, you know, switching between a code-based mindset to this precedent-based, and if the thinking of it ever dominated the other, or like in your current practice, you use more common law. What does that look like today?
I think that I find being a common law lawyer a lot harder than being a civilist. I'm going to say civilist, a civil tradition, civilist tradition, to the point that as a civil law lawyer, you can really lean back on the legislature and the rules that have been legislated, and you can lean back on the civil code. I'm sure in Brazil you have a civil code as well. Most civil law tradition, we have that book. And what I like about that book is that it says everything you need to know, and it's so well written. A lot of what I hate when I have that discussion with common law lawyers is that they say, "Oh, regulations or regs." You hear about the regulations or regs in Ontario, the Ontario regulations. They're very sporadic. They're poorly written. They're just very timely written, but the regulations don't flow well through time. If I make sense. But when you look at a civil code, you're looking at a piece of art. Really, you look at a piece of art. For example, and I'm sure then in Brazil, you'd have it. In Germany, it's the same way. You'd have a code that's written, then by the Napoleonic traditions. It says the code is written in a way that you're from birth to death. All the chapters are so well written. You have how you become a person. What is a person? What are the rights of the person? To how to even name your child. It's actually in the Quebec code. It actually is a rule on how to name your child. You should not, you cannot, name your child in a defamous way, with defamous way. there's actually a case law that's actually quite interesting. There's like a person that tried to call their child spatula. And it goes against the code because you cannot name your child a certain way and blah, blah, and all that to say is that as a lawyer, it's a lot easier. It makes life a lot easier, civil lawyer, to be a civilist, I find. But as a law student, it's a different story. As a law student, I know that your podcast is about law students, you're talking about law students and all that. And if any of common law students are going to go study a civilist tradition, they're going to have a hard time because I'll tell you this, you can study jurisprudence as much as you want, but if you don't have the right answer, you're going to get the hammer. Like you're really going to get the hammer. And because I found when I was studying common law, I could read, as long as I read and understood the case, I could read the deference or this or that, and I could just write and write and write and write as much as I could, and then I would get a good mark because it said, okay, this student didn't get the right answer, but this student understood the principles that were taught in X case, this person, this versus this, we'll give them the mark. Now, in civil law tradition, it's a different story. You really need to understand how to break down regulation, the word and or, not this and that. That's a huge strike. And I find a lot of common law lawyers would benefit from civil law education to understand how every little word is so impactful in the work you do. On the other hand around, I found that common law is working as a common law, to answer your question, working as a common law lawyer is a lot more liberating. We can look at policies, we can look at different things, we can negotiate. It's a lot more business friendly. And I've been working as a trade lawyer for a while now, and for that reason, I can imagine how trade has been absolutely gone bonkers now. I guess it's Greenland now. The ISR, and I find that depends on when you work. As a common law lawyer, I think it's about more liberating. You can negotiate more. You can interpret more. Jurisprudence obviously takes a bit more of a so yeah.
Fantastic. No, very interesting point of view, and interesting to know a little more about, your practice in trade and how kind of having a specific law background allows you to do things differently. That's very, very interesting. And I think that pretty much like segue into that. I also saw you have an MBA, and I'm always very interested in something that I hear sometimes, but I'm always curious to know like, what's your view on it. So I find that oftentimes lawyers are kind of trained to be very much risk avoidant, right? And I find on the other hand that business training usually focuses on managing risk, be it in finance, in different aspects. So I'm wondering from your perspective, when you advise government businesses, which kind of mindset leads that for you? Is it like the lawyer avoid risk? Is it the business manage risk? Is it a little bit of everything? What are your thoughts?
I think that as a lawyer, I think we have to stop being risk avoidant. We have to be enablers, business enablers. We're in common law land, and for God's sake, I mean, this is the opportunity. You have a lot of leeway to look at different options. As a lawyer, I think that you have a client. The client has an options, right? So in government, you have just the way it usually works is that you have an issue. That issue includes a policy option, and then they have 4 or 5 options. That option becomes a decision note, they call it, and it goes to the attorney general. It goes to whatever the deputy minister, depending on the level of the seriousness of the matter. It could be, for example, let's cancel. Okay, let's say this. Let's cancel Crown Royal, or not. I'm talking about alcohol now because that's the issue now, right? Cancel American alcohol and all that, or EV vehicles. Okay. All right, but these decisions are a lot bit more minor. I'm just like, I'm just expanding here just for the sake of the conversation. You have decisions, you have options. So say we have option 1, 2, 3, or 4. These options are policy options, and they're going to become law later. Around, they're going to go to the Legislative Council, and they look at legal to look at the risk. And it's the legal lawyer's job to lay out the risk. And it's always been that way. You lay out the risks and they say, these are the risks that you have if you choose this option. These are the risks if you have this option or that option. But I find that a good lawyer, and this is where the MBA kicked in, not only identifies the risk, but looks at a little bit more into what the question's asking. Right? So I had a case, for example, not too long ago about these bolts going on to EV vehicles. They have um, the supply chain goes from the United States to Canada on different parts of vehicles, and they have this code, and that code gives them tariffs, and the tariffs becomes taxed. And this one talks about the CUSMA agreement or the USMCA, whatever you want to call it. Should we ban the bolts? Should we put them in? Should we put them in Canada? Should we, all these questions. I think that the MPA, what it did to me is that instead of just flat out looking at that bolt as an issue, as a legal issue, I look at it as like, I'm going to call the person who's dealing with that policy and understand the business behind that bolt, where it's coming from, where it is, and see a different angle. So maybe that risk that I'm putting in is not that high. Maybe it's a bit lower. All that to say is that I'm trying to enable business as much as possible, because the way you want to do is you want to do client a service. You don't want to be a fear-mongering Great Wall of China every time they call you. It's always no, it's always no, it's always a risk. No, you want to say, well, no, there's an option. There's another option as well. All right. I can't tell you much of the story about the bolt because it's still ongoing, but I'll tell you this. What I counseled was that we need to look at different ways that how that bolt traveled around. Because that bolt, essentially, it's steel made from Canada. It goes back to the United States. It goes back to complex in Canada. I mean, whatever that bolt is made of, it's coming back and forth, crossing the border 5 times almost. So, a business perspective of just saying, oh, it's flat out. That bolt, that bolt is bad. It's not a good service. So all that to say, having a good business mind, an MBA gives you a good mind of human resources, project management, gives you a good insight on how supply chain works. And if you're going to go to business law, it gives you a sight of how to run a business, which gives you all the risks that a business do, but not only the risks, but also all the detriment and the hard work that a lot of business people go through to build a business. And as a lawyer, if you understand that, you would say that maybe, you gotta be a little bit softer in the counsel.
Fantastic. I always love to hear that from lawyers who either worked specifically a lot with businesses or have that business background. And recently, one of our episodes is actually called The Office of Yes. And I talked to in-house.
I like that.
Spoke a lot about that. And I love that you touched on the same subject.
You'll have no clients.
Fair enough.
No clients. You'll have no clients. So you'll do no. You'll have no clients. You'll just say, okay, well, this is a risk, but let's try left or let's try right. Let's try different ways.
And different clients who have a different kind of appetite for risk as well, right? So it's important to know the options, because some people are just willing to be, taking those risks and all of that.
Yeah, actually, you're making a really good point here, because there's a lot of small businesses in Ontario right now that are dealing with AI, dealing with a lot of energy. Energy is a big thing right now going in with the data centers using different types of energy. There's there's a lot going on, and you have to understand there's some businesses that they're actually piercing into the gray area of a non-legislative way. I mean, the AI, for example, there's a lot not known about AI still, and you can't just be no. There's actually a business opportunity there. There's a service to the client. You have to act on it.
Amazing. Eugene, now I want to know kind of like a different mindset as well. As we said, you're a very curious person. You've studied lots of different areas, and you've been in the military before. You work with national defense, lots of very interesting roles. So we talked about kind of the lawyer mindset, the business mindset, but I also wonder if there's kind of like a military mindset. I suppose that in the military, a lot of decisions have to be, immediate life saving and so forth. And in law, we tend to, kind of slow things down, analyze it. So I'm curious if, your experience in the military has shaped the urgency in which you work with legal issues, legal strategy. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit about that from your
Yeah.
experience.
And I'll tell you this: I'm still in the military. I'm still an officer and cavalry officer in Canadian Armed Forces. But I will tell you this: what the military taught me was not to act quickly. I did, but I think I already had that. But what it did do to me is that it taught me to work as a team. That's what it would taught me. Because I'll tell you this: when you're in a tank, for example, right? You're in a mission. You have troops to feed. Can you imagine this? I even have to think to give halal ration packs to someone. I have to think about if someone's getting divorced. I'm leading 260 people into battle. I mean, that's a lot of people, and the ages of 18 to 30. I mean, it's absolutely enormous. That I need to take care of their pay, their welfare, their vacation, their well-being, but I also have to take care of the mission, um, rules of fire, the rules of engagements. If we take prisoners, there's legal that has to deal with that as well. There's a lot of things you have to think about. Tank breaks down. What do you do? You break down all the time. You can just imagine. You have potholes here. The cars break down. Imagine Afghanistan, how much things break down. All that to say, to keep the story short, is that you need to work as a team. I thought myself that by myself, I know not a lot. I actually know nothing. Like in a law firm, everyone has had different experience, the types of files they've had, the types of work they've had, their experience before being in law school that they bring in. Everyone just brings in a wealth of knowledge. The secret is to be a good coordinator. So when you have a file in front of you, have a file, and I kid you not, as a lawyer, you find files that are completely ridiculous, like off the chart ridiculous. You have no idea, right? I had lawyers that had trade lawyers, for example, and I think your listeners are gonna love this. They had files from Japan. Get this: Japan is a trade law file. A file from Japan coming in. Saw it was child pornography, and it was like this anti comic book stuff. But you have crazy files, right? Coming in. But as soon as you understand, for example, that luckily that person, for example, had a Japanese lawyer beside them and saying, that's not child pornography. That's actually comic. That's actually art from Japan. And they went to the CBSA, the Canadian Security Border Agency, and they actually went into the Superior Court of Ontario, and they went in and they discussed this, and they said, no, this is artwork, and it worked. All that to say, you need to be a really good collaborator with the people that you work with, because alone there's not much you can do. As a lawyer, there's not much you can do. You have to work with the people that you're working with. You need to know them, understand them, know where they're coming from, and value the knowledge that they bring in. Like that case that I thought it was completely crazy. I mean, someone coming in with, there was a U of T student that went to Japan and brought some comics, but that comic had some sexual explicit stuff, and I was like, my God, but how did it work out? That case would not have been won in front of CBSA if that person that was not working with somebody else that knew about that and had known about that. That case would have been lost. That person would have been jailed right now. That person was released. Um, but all that to say is, I'm just thinking about that case because I never had a case that I would call it um, that crazy or whatever you call it in my desk. But all that to say is, it was all that. I think it's coordinating, collaborating, and in the military, I learned that by myself, I'm nobody. I need to. When I'm in the military, I needed to know the engineer. I needed to know the um, software engineers for the tanks. I needed to know the medics. I needed to know this, to that. I needed to know the logistics officers very well. So as soon as there's an issue, I could just WhatsApp them. Right? Instead of having to go through all the people channels, I just WhatsApp. Hey, I have an issue. Don't worry, Eugene. I know exactly what to do. Boom, it's done. That's how I lived through my 8 years in the military. And I survived the military is by being friends with a lot of people. Just be friends with them. Just take them out for a beer, have coffee chats, go for wings. I don't know. Just do something. Get to know them because they're going to save your life. Maybe not in the military sense, but they're going to save your life in the files that you have. And that's what happened with a lot of my friends.
That's fantastic, and I think that really kind of takes us to a good point here. I wanted to finish up today asking about the field you chose for yourself in law after being exposed to all these different areas, and I feel like from my experience talking with other law students or early career professionals, there's always a little bit of a question of like, what should I do with my career? Where should I take it? Should I pursue my interest or should I kind of look into, the stuff that I need right now to, the compensation and so forth. So I'm curious if you have any kind of advice that, you wish you had received before or something that you tell people when you're talking to younger lawyers.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this idea of 1L, 2L, I think it's complete just garbage. It's not gonna. It's 2 years of your life. Like, calm down. It's not gonna work. If it does, great, but it's not how you want. You don't have to fit the cookie cutter. Being a legal professional, for example, I worked a lot in Europe as a diplomat, and I worked a lot in the International Court of Justice, and I worked in the Canadian Embassy in Belgrade and other international organizations. I got to tell you this: they love Canadian lawyers. They love them. I have no idea, but they have something. They have something about Canadian lawyers. As soon as there's a Canadian lawyer student, it's an opportunity. I think that you don't have to be a lawyer if you study law and even if you bar. There's a lot of great things you can do, and even better than being a lawyer. You're better paid. Sometimes the difference that someone just gives you for being a lawyer to being a communications officer, to being a logistics officer. I'm not talking about the military, but I'm talking about also in the private sector. It's just more thoughtful that this person understands the rules and regulations around what they're doing. Why not? They've had a bachelor's before. They've had good study before. Why not? When you mention pay, I know law the lawyers that I know that are mostly paid are not lawyers, but they have been lawyers before. In a long shot. Um, the ambassadors that I've met a lot of heads of state as well, all lawyers, and great, great people. And I think that the idea if that you are an Ontario lawyer, you do Ontario bar, you gotta do your L1, L2, and you gotta go to FASCN or BLG, and that's your life. I think it's completely false. I think it's terrible. It's not the way you should view your practice in any sense.
I appreciate it. I feel like that's one of the coolest parts about being able to interview so many lawyers who are working in interesting projects all across the world is really that I get to hear the everything in between, people who kind of like went to middle school and decided that they wanted to be a lawyer. And ever since, we're very happy with the firm life, all the way to people who went through really, really different
Yeah.
pathways. And I think that's what's really cool about it all is that like you have a choice. Nobody has a kind of a guess in your head and you get to choose. So I think that's
Yeah, and especially I have to tell you as well that for and if for your listeners, I gotta tell you that if you're a lawyer in Ontario, actually not even a lawyer, if you studied law in Ontario without being a lawyer, you could be an international lawyer. You can go to The Hague, as I have. You can work in Vienna. You can work in Geneva. You can work in The Hague, or in New York as well, as a jurist. They call them jurists, not lawyers. They call them jurists because I mean, you have offices of lawyers of almost 30 different countries sometimes. They didn't all pass the New York bar or the Hague bar. They don't even speak Dutch or Flemish or French, but they're lawyers. They studied law in their country. So I would definitely invite your listeners to also look at that option as well, to look abroad and look at international organizations, be jurist for international organizations, because you don't have to be in international law, international organizations to, there's no bar. It doesn't exist. There's no international bar.
I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with us today. Thank you all for tuning into today's episode.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.